is handling these issues on the world stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Representative Tulsi Gabbard.
Thank you so much. Aloha. Nice to see you. Thank you. Heartfelt thanks to Mike Wyrick for being here, for your kind introduction, helping to get the word out about our town hall tonight, and thank you, Mike, for your leadership here in Lynn County. Thank you, Ashley, for your leadership and service and taking the time to join us here. I was telling Ashley just before coming in, I served on the City Council in Honolulu. The work that's done, that if you don't do your job, people know right away. You hear about it right away. But on the flip side of that, it's an incredible opportunity to be able to actually get things done very quickly. Things filling potholes, sewers, water, trash, all of the really important things in our lives every day. So thanks for your service there. And thanks to all of you. Thanks to all of you for being here. I want to say thanks to Curtis, who is the owner of this fine business. He's downstairs right now, but there he is. Oh, there you are. Thanks, Curtis. Thank you. You've got a beautiful shop, and just really appreciate your opening your doors to us to be able to gather here tonight. There are so many different important issues that I look forward to discussing here tonight. Mike mentioned a number of them, and just broadly the positions that I hold. I look forward to having this conversation, but one of the things that I'm being asked more and more about is how do we get past the deep divides within our country? That for a lot of us, we've never seen our country so divided. You know, whether it's the hyper-partisanship, racism, bigotry, hatred, these divisions and wedges that are being driven between us, pushing people into their camps or whatever, and pitting one group against the other. And it breaks my heart, because this is not who we are, and this is not representative of how we must come together in order to solve many of the challenges that we face. Not just the challenges that face Democrats, not just the challenges that face Republicans, but the challenges that face us as Americans. The other day I went back and reread Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, because there's a term that's in there that many of us know and remember, a government of, by, and for the people, and how that's the key for us to be able to make sure that people's voices are heard, represented, and the needs are served. But I just read that short speech that he gave from the beginning, where he talked about a new nation being born free, with equality for all people, and recognizing the great sacrifice of those who paid the ultimate price, who laid their lives down on that battlefield. And he spoke of how we could all best honor their great sacrifice, how we could all best honor that sacrifice by making sure we have a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that really hit close to home, because it is a great reminder of that foundation upon which we stand, and that which unites us, which sometimes it's easy to forget when you see people who disagree with us so strongly on issues that we care deeply about. Issues they care deeply about, but they have different ideas on how best to solve a problem. And so this is where I know our path forward lies, in standing firmly on that ground of respect and unity as Americans. Respecting the diversity that I think makes our country great. It's a very diverse fabric woven throughout our country, people from different parts of the country, people from different parts of the world who've come here with their own stories, background, experience, ideas, ideologies. That this is who we are as Americans, and that when we remember this, when we are inspired by this message that Abraham Lincoln delivered to us, then we can actually begin the dialogue that's necessary to solve problems. This question about how do we overcome the divides is unfortunately one that too many people think is impossible. It's impossible for us to come together again. But I refuse to accept that. I refuse to accept that, because accepting that would mean we just throw in the towel and go home. And we only hang out with people who are quote unquote like us, however you define that. But that undermines who we are as a country. And divided, we fall. Bringing about this government of, by, and for the people is at the heart of what we must do, and it's the heart of this movement that we are building in our campaign. Because we are recognizing the root cause of so many of these challenges that we face. So many of the challenges we face are there and exist and are causing harm to people because we have a government of, by, and for the very few, the very rich, and the very powerful. Now, those aren't just empty words that are thrown out. This is not saying, well, this is the poor versus the rich. No, this is just a fact. This is a fact, because a government of, by, and for the rich and powerful influences our healthcare policy in a way that benefits them to the detriment of the people. Where even as we have made some progress, baby steps forward towards providing better quality care to more people in this country, we are still in a place where tens of millions of people cannot get health insurance, they can't afford it, or they're covered, but they're so underinsured that if they ever actually needed it, they wouldn't be able to afford it at all. How is that possible? Because we have big insurance and big pharma that have had such a heavy influence over the writing of these policies, that they're the ones who are making huge profits while people are literally struggling, fearful that this one visit to the ER because your kid broke their arm at school will break the bank, will put you out in the street because they're struggling, living paycheck to paycheck. It is this big influence in these lobbyists who initially, when the Affordable Care Act was drafted and proposed in Congress, it lifted the ban that disallowed Medicare from negotiating lower drug prices with prescription drug companies, which is what we needed. That's the change we needed. But that's not what was in the final bill that was passed. Now they say, well, this was a necessary compromise in order to pass it. Well, that bill passed with 100% Democrats voting for it and 0 Republicans. So where was the compromise? The compromise was with the lobbyists who had influence over politicians representing big pharmaceutical companies rather than looking out for the interests of the people who are dependent on Medicare to be able to afford those prescription drug prices. Now, this is not a small thing, because if you look at our economic system, both here in the United States and around the world, the United States government is the #1 purchaser, the #1 customer of prescription drugs around the world. The #1 purchaser. We spend more money on prescription drugs than any other country in the world. That puts us in a position of strength. If you're looking at a negotiating table, I'm your #1 customer. That means I have leverage. That means I can advocate for my shareholders, which the United States government, that's us, that's all of us. Unfortunately, that's not what we have. So we see the consequence of a government of, by, and for the rich and powerful. We see this impact in our criminal justice system. Deeply broken criminal justice system. We see this in the failed war on drugs. See, one of the biggest opponents over the years towards ending the federal marijuana prohibition has been the prescription drug companies. Because they see how in states, I think we're up to 33 states now in the country who have legalized some form of medicinal or recreational marijuana. I've seen a direct correlation in a reduction of opioid addiction and opioid-related deaths. That means less money going into the hands of Purdue Pharma, because people have other options. We see a government of, by, and for the rich and powerful directly impacting policymakers. This leads to, how do we get rid of that influence? Yes, it's by electing leaders who refuse to take PAC contributions, who refuse to take lobbyist money. That's a huge first step, and that can be done right away. We've already seen in the 2018 elections, there were more people running for Congress. I think at one point it was 40 or 50 people running for Congress who made that promise and held to it, made that commitment, and a number of them got elected. No PAC or lobbyist contributions. Number 2, closing the revolving door within our US government that allows people who are in positions of leadership, whether they are elected officials or they are senior staffers in the government, to work in a body that provides oversight or regulates an industry, or writes contracts for someone in that industry, whether it's defense, healthcare, go down the list, and then walk out of that job and get a big payout from either that contract or someone in the industry. This is legislation that I'm working on right now in Congress to close this revolving door, to make it so members of Congress are not allowed to become lobbyists. We've seen too often how, and I saw this shortly after I got elected, there was a woman who's in a very senior ranking position on the Energy and Commerce Committee, which covers a whole, a vast spectrum of issues. And she had been in Congress for over 10, 15 years, long time. She left that job and immediately got a job with someone in the energy sector making $1.3 million a year. How does that happen? Right, it's self-serving. It's self-serving. You see on Wall Street. You see on Wall Street. Our big banks are bigger now than they were when they were supposedly too big to fail back then. And you have people who are working on Wall Street, leave Wall Street for a term, go and get appointed as positions on the SEC to regulate Wall Street, take a pay cut for that little while, and then turn around and go back and get their payout. Are we supposed to trust that they're actually looking out for our interests? No, they're not. That's why, one of the reasons why we're in the position that we're in. We see the military-industrial complex, same thing. We see example after example, how people who are in a position where they're writing those contracts, multi-billion-dollar contracts, taxpayer dollars, leave that job, go and work for the contractor who won that bid. The list goes on and on. There are so many different examples that we can cite in almost every part of our government, which gets to the heart of where we need to make that change. The obstacles seem too great sometimes. You feel like, how do you overcome the influence of big money in our politics? We can't forget the power within our own voices, because that is the only way that we make this change. Yes. That is the only way. And we see this with, victories that happen maybe at the local level in government. We've seen this at the national level. I've seen how there have been examples where we've had a bill that was coming up for a vote, let's say the next day. There was an issue around civil liberties and privacy on the internet, and it looked like that bill was going to pass without a problem. All of a sudden, people found out about it. Twitter lit up, Facebook lit up, phones started ringing, emails started piling into our mailboxes, and that bill that was supposed to pass with the rubber stamp completely flipped and failed. We can't underestimate the power of our own voices as issues come up, whether we're advocating for them or opposing them, and of course at the ballot box, making decisions about who we are choosing as our leaders. Are they going to be leaders who will truly be for the people? Or are they those who will go into Washington and then fall into the same traps in the black hole that's existed there for far too long, this black hole of legal corruption? There is an issue that is central to our ability to be able to put the resources that we need towards protecting our environment, addressing climate change, towards making sure that we have Medicare for all, that every person is able to get the quality care that they need, resources that we need to put towards investment in our infrastructure, to strengthening our agriculture industries, resources that we need to put forward to strengthen our education system, make sure that we are paying our teachers what they deserve, that our kids have the tools that they need to be successful. There are so many things that are lacking. And there's an issue that is central to our ability to address that, and that issue is the cost of war. The cost of war. Now this seems like, well, that's foreign policy, right? That's this one little issue that's sitting over here by itself, but we have a whole lineup of other issues that we've got to address that really affect us and our families and our kids every day right here at home. But every time your local city council member, your state representative, your member of Congress tells you, you know what, there's not enough money to make sure that we've got clean water coming out of our faucets. There's not enough money to make sure that we have quality health care for all, whether you have a little money or a lot of money. There's just not enough money to make sure that our kids have the tools they need to get the best education possible. But they're not taking into consideration the reality that since 9/11 alone, this 18th anniversary that we just observed, we as taxpayers have spent over $6 trillion. That's how your eyes get big. $6 trillion. What did we spend it on? On things that made our country more safe? No. No. Over $6 trillion have gone to pay for wasteful, counterproductive regime change wars to topple authoritarian dictators in other countries that had nothing to do with the attack on 9/11, and to continue the nation building that has followed, that continues in countries like Afghanistan and Iraq. In Afghanistan, we are spending $4 billion every month right now. $4 billion every month. We've spent over $1 trillion total in that country. Are we more safe now than we were on 9/11? No. It is because of these failed policies that Al-Qaeda itself, what to speak of all the other affiliated and offshoot terrorist groups that have grown since then, Al-Qaeda itself is stronger now than they were on 9/11. This is the reality. So what has that money gone towards? How has it served the interests of the American people? How has it strengthened our country? It has not. It has not. And this is what needs to change. This is where we need to change our priorities as a country and to have leaders who have the courage to stand up to the military-industrial complex and those who profit from this cost of war. As president, I will end these wasteful regime change wars. And work to end this new Cold War that we're in. There's increasing tensions between the United States and nuclear-armed countries like Russia and China. Increasing tensions, a nuclear arms race that is now continuing to escalate, especially with Trump's tearing up the INF treaty. A treaty that people 30 years ago said was impossible, an impossible deal between Reagan and Gorbachev. But you know what? They did it. They did it, and it was a deal that made our respective people more safe and the world more safe by reducing the numbers of nuclear weapons and missiles in the world. Trump tore that treaty up rather than fixing it and strengthening it and bringing more countries into the fold. And what's happened as a result? Immediately, you see contracts going out to build more missiles that were banned under that treaty. Who benefits from that? There's only one group of people, and it's a small group of people. It's people making profits from building those missiles with the money that's coming out of our pockets, the money that's coming out of our schools, the money that's coming out of our healthcare system, out of our infrastructure needs, our parks, our streets, our bridges, our dams, our levees. You cannot separate foreign policy from domestic policy. I will end these wars, and I will redirect the dollars that would have continued to have been wasted on these wars and weapons and redirect it towards serving the needs of our people right here at home. Things like healthcare for all. Addressing climate change, protecting our environment, strengthening education, things that we've just talked about. This is where our dollars and our resources should be going. Now, this does not mean I'm advocating to be an isolationist, that we just turn our back on the world and we hover in and look inward, not at all. And it's sad, I found that I get asked more often in Washington than anywhere else. That's what people say. Well, you're against regime change wars. That means you're an isolationist. It's sad because it's very revealing about the culture that we're living in. especially in Washington, where people think the only way you can relate to other countries is by bombing them or instituting crippling sanctions. How about we stop being the world's police and that we lead in being a force for good in the world? That we approach other countries, treating them with respect rather than bullying them with the force of the strongest military in the world. Dealing with other countries like China, for example. I know there's a trade and tariff war going on right now that's having an especially hard impact on Iowa farmers, on the agriculture industry, on manufacturers, on small business owners, people who need certainty to look forward and plan. You know, what are you going to plant in next year's crops? Who are you going to sell them to? For a small business owner, doing business, getting products from China, what do I plan for? Am I going to have to, you know, rack up my prices? What am I going to do? Providing all this uncertainty. Instead of escalating a trade war, as Trump is doing so irresponsibly and impulsively and emotionally, wreaking the kind of havoc that we are seeing, and putting us in a dangerous place, because if you've got an economic war, that can very quickly escalate into a cold war, that escalates into a hot war, and you're talking about a nuclear-armed country with China. Plus, it closes the door for us to be able to work with China on other areas where we have shared interest. So the kind of leadership that I would bring as president and commander-in-chief is one that has a foreign policy based on cooperation rather than conflict. So we can work with countries like China. Yes, have those tough negotiations to work out the issues related to IP theft, the trade imbalance that exists. Provide that certainty and that strategic path going forward. Also allowing for and creating that space to work with China on things like climate change. It's something they're concerned about, it's something we're concerned about, recognizing that even when we do all that we need to do here in this country, it doesn't even come close. It doesn't even come close to being enough to stop the kinds of changes we are seeing in our climate from continuing to escalate, from continuing to pose the kinds of threats and problems that we're seeing. Foreign policy cannot be separated from our domestic policy. One last example I'll give on this before we open it up to questions relates to immigration. Too often, policymakers in the news, they're so reactive to the crisis at the border, and there is a crisis. There's a humanitarian crisis at the border. But why are all of these people putting their own lives at risk to walk thousands of miles to seek refuge here in our country? We have to go back to the root cause of these problems. And we don't have to go back very far when we look at Central America and South America. You know, it was only back in 2009 where we see how US policy has been to intervene in these countries, to try to pick and choose who the leader should be, remove this one and put that one in place, creating instability, creating hardship for people there. And it's had a detrimental impact on their ability to have a safe, stable, secure country to live in. Our foreign policy cannot be separated from our domestic policy. There is more good that we can do to actually help these people remain in their homes with their families and in their countries, while also making sure that we reform our immigration system, that we dedicate resources to the border to help those who are seeking asylum, and reforming our legal immigration system that's not working for anyone. We get to solving these problems by recognizing the root cause and coming together around our shared interests for a strong, bright, peace, and prosperous future for every single one of us, leaving no one behind. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to open it up to some questions here. Before we do so, I want to say thank you to Steve, our sound guy. Raise your hand, Steve. Thank you very much. All right, we've got Yvette here. Yeah, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thanks for coming back to Cedar Rapids.
Nice to see you again. Aloha.
You too. I know I've asked you before about early education. When you mention education, are you including birth through 5?
Yes.
How?
There's a number of things that we have to do. First of all, we've just got to recognize that we as a country are not prioritizing education of our children. You know, we talk about it, investing in our kids are our future, but when you look at the resources are not matching the rhetoric. That's the problem here. And so whether you're talking about, you know, universal pre-K, you're talking about making it so that you have, are opening and increasing that access for people to be able to get that best child care and education for their kids, those are the kinds of investments that we need to make. Okay. I think that we need to look at this maybe a little bit more expansively and broadly. For example, you have, let's say, a 2-parent household, and you have one parent, whether it's the mom or the dad or whoever, who wants to be able to stay home longer than maybe the 6 or 8 weeks that they have for maternity or paternity leave. So they can't afford daycare because it's so expensive. What are they going to do? And so these are the kinds of things that choices that people are faced with is, okay, so if we're able to provide assistance for folks to get quality daycare, eventually getting into preschool and pre-K and so on, but what if we are to provide those resources directly to the parents so that they can be the ones to provide that quality care for their kids if they choose to do so instead of going back to work? I think we've got to provide more options to folks to empower themselves to make the best decisions for their families and for their children.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. It's nice to see you again. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank
My
you.
question has to do with the withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Yes.
Because I feel like we're in a period like in the early 70s in Vietnam where the writing was on the wall, but we didn't leave because the military still thought somehow they could win.
Yeah.
So we know better this time around. So how do we get out?
We should know better. We should know better. But the fact that we are 18 years post the attack on September 11th, and we still have thousands of troops in Afghanistan who are still being killed in combat now, says that our leaders have not learned, that they don't know any better. Very often, if you ask military leaders and civilian leaders, whether it's in the DOD or the State Department, say, so it's important that we stay there until we win. What does winning mean? How do you define that? What is the objective? You know, for me as a soldier, this is something that's drilled into me from the very first day that I showed up at basic training. You have to know that you have a clear objective before you embark on a mission, and that it is an achievable objective. The objective can't just be, well, we're going to go into Afghanistan and we're going to stay there until all corruption is rooted out of their government. The Taliban has been completely wiped off the face of the earth, and there is a safe, secure place for the Afghan people. Those are definitely goals for the future of Afghanistan, but only the people of Afghanistan can make that future a reality. What can we as the United States do? We can't accomplish any of those things. Our troops should have come home long ago. Now, I've said many times, as president, I would bring our troops home immediately. Not wait until the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th year. I would bring them home immediately.
I have a question about student loans.
Yeah.
I have 4 kids. 2 are undergraduates. 1 is teaching and had to get her master's for her job. A 3rd is going back for a master's for a job she would like to do. One of the undergraduates is being told to be a guidance counselor. He needs a master's. They all want to give back They're all being told they need masters. What is your policy with the student loans? I can tell you the two oldest are in debt.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, this is a deep-seated problem that, you know, I go back and look through history of how we got to this place where we have our young people being told that they can't get the job that they want or work in the career path that they desire or just get a good paying job unless they have a master's degree, unless they put themselves $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 more in debt, hundreds of thousands of dollars more in debt. When we look back, way back, getting a bachelor's degree was more of, maybe it was something that rich people sent their kids to because it was a status symbol. And most working folks, they went and they got the skills they needed, whether it's through vocational training or a very skill-specific training set so that they got the skills they needed and then they went to work in whatever field it was. We've gotten to a culture now where it continues to be a status thing that society has set up for people, even though we've seen now for years that people who are graduating with an incredible amount of debt, with 1 degree or 2 or more, are still finding it very difficult, if not impossible, to get a job in their field and a job that they can afford to live with, a job that pays them really a living wage. So I think there's a number of things that we've got to address here. We've got to have a debt forgiveness plan, especially for those who are choosing paths of public service. And there are so many different ways, whether you're talking about healthcare or teachers or counselors. I mean, there's so many different needs that we need filled within our community that these aren't big Wall Street, big money jobs. These are public service jobs. We've got to look at having a level of accountability for these higher education institutions, so that whether you as a parent or a student, before making their decision about the kind of debt they're taking on, that they'll be able to look and see, okay, if I go to this school, their graduates have a 95% rate of employment in their field of choice. I would want to know that before investing my life savings and then some into that institution. If you go to a school, they've got a 10% employment rate. Well, yeah, maybe something's going on there that they need to figure out before I give them all my money. I think we've got to look at the opportunity that exists to, as a country, invest more in apprenticeships, in vocational training, in our community colleges, to make it accessible for those who are saying, yeah, you know what, a bachelor's degree just isn't for me. I just want to get right into it, get these very specific skills and get to work. We as a society can't turn down our nose at that and say, well, you know what, you'll never amount to anything because you don't have all these letters after your name. That's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it disrespects the people of our country who do the hard work that we all need, that we all depend on. And lastly, there's unexplored potential when it comes to how we can best maximize all that technology offers in being able to deliver that education at a much lower cost. I think the Khan Academy has shown what's possible in providing, using technology to be able to provide education that doesn't completely replace maybe the traditional educational experience, but actually strengthens it. You know, letting someone learn at their own pace, get the skills that they need wherever they may be in the world. This is something that I have personal experience in, so I'm a big advocate for it because most of my bachelor's degree I did through distance learning. It's a long story, but a long story short, I ended up pursuing my bachelor's degree a little bit later in life. I think I was, 23 or 24 when I started, but I was working full time. I was deployed to Iraq, literally sitting in the education tent was what they called it. Mortars going overhead, having to run out and get into the bunker when there was an attack, coming back out and jumping back on the laptop. Continuing that until I graduated, actually during my second deployment. So I never got to walk across the stage, but I'm one example that shows, hey, it's possible. Where there's a will, there's a way, and we are underutilizing all that technology has to offer and being able to do that, provide that accessibility at a much more affordable rate.
According to the, I according to the Iowa CCI Action candidate survey, you have come out in support of price floor programs.
Yeah.
And thank you for doing that. It's really the biggest thing, the main thing farmers need. If you look at in green here, the price floors that have been that were put in by the Democratic New Deal and then lowered down, 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 and eliminated over the years. And really, this is a trade war that's bigger than the Trump trade war. The Trump trade war is a small potatoes compared to the long, more than 60 years of lowering the price floor. Do you have you put that into a bigger, kind of like a farm plan or anything like that?
We're working on that.
Okay.
We're working on that. We'll be releasing that in the course of the campaign, doing all of our research and getting input from people who have a strong background in this. Yeah, so I'd appreciate getting a look at those statistics that you're providing. I think just more broadly, I'll comment on where I think the twisted priorities have occurred that have resulted in the thing that you're pointing out, which once again leads back to a government of, by, and for the rich and powerful. I've been through 2 farm bills now in Congress. I've been there for almost 7 years, and time after time we see, again, the influence of these huge multinational agriculture corporations. They don't care about the quality of our soil. They don't care about the well-being of our farmers. How many family farms are passed down generation to generation to generation. We're at a point now where I've heard from a lot of folks, they're questioning whether or not they can continue. So much of our tax subsidies goes towards those multinational corporations. So again, we look at where our priorities are and where they should be, and who has the power in setting those prices, and who gets hurt, who benefits the most and who gets hurt the most. And it is our local farmers. Farming is a huge issue for us in Hawaii. As you can imagine, an island state, we're the most remote island chain in the nation. And so food security is a huge issue, because if planes aren't bringing the food in and boats aren't bringing the food in, we've got something like a 2-week food supply in our state. And that's it. And that's it. So something that we're looking at in investing more both locally in Hawaii, but also this is legislation I've worked on and gotten included in some of these bills in Congress, is just that, in empowering and incentivizing, supporting local farmers, people who are growing sustainably and growing food that best helps support their communities.
And this price floor does help those local farmers as well as organic farmers. And you don't need any subsidies if you have an adequate price floor.
Exactly.
At all.
Right. Thank you. Yes, W.
Hey, I'm Jason. I'm with the local Sunrise Movement. As you've seen being here in Iowa, how climate change has affected Iowa.
Yeah.
What I'm curious is, how has climate change affected Hawaii?
Yeah. Thank you for asking. This is something back from when I was on the city council that I really started to learn a lot more, because I was a member of the Honolulu City Council, which covers the entire island of Oahu, close to 1 million people on that island. So my district had about 100,000 constituents. And one of the first briefings that we got was from climatologists and leaders in the hotel industry. Why? Because they're looking at, tourism is the #1 driver of our economy, and they're looking at which of the hotels are going to be underwater and in what period of time. Not a question of if, but literally, here are the investments we're making in infrastructure, public infrastructure. Here's where the private investments are going. How long are they going to last? We have a major transit system that's being built right now. It's extremely controversial, as transit systems often are. It is over budget and behind schedule. But one of the issues that is a valid question that people are raising is the current path of this rail system, it's a 22-mile rail system, is going to be underwater within the next, couple of decades. And then what? And then what? We're still going to be paying the bill for this thing when it's underwater and not usable. We have seen last year a number of hurricanes, serious flooding, displaced people, mudslides that shut off an entire community. The only way you could get there was with a boat going around the island. There's a number of different impacts that we're seeing there that are not just unique to Hawaii. We're seeing far more fires this year than there has been that I can ever remember, things that we're seeing happening in many different parts of the country. I think the really unfortunate things as these climate conversations are happening in different parts of the country is they're too often becoming a flashpoint, a divisive point, that you either believe in climate change, that it's real and it's happening and understanding why, and therefore what we must do to change, or you're a climate denier and you've closed your eyes to what's happening in the world and you don't believe anything. But when you take away those flashpoint terms and you just break it down to these very real impacts that are happening, not just in blue states, but in red states, not just in blue communities, but red communities. But these are things that are impacting people everywhere, and break it down to what's real. Having a safe place where kids can grow up, and their kids will have a future. Making sure that we have clean water to drink, clean air to breathe. And we break it down to these things that are practical and very real to every single person in this country, every single person in the world, then I believe we can begin to make progress in coming together, rather than allowing something so serious and so important to be such an unfortunately divisive issue that it's become. What's your name?
I'm Grace.
Nice to see you, Grace.
What's your opinion on Blue Zone schools?
Good question. Thank you. I think if we're talking about Blue Zone with regards to diet and nutrition, Blue Zone, the Blue Zone project, I am a big fan of. This is something that we've seen has had a very positive impact in my home communities in Hawaii, and really understanding the impact of our diet and what we put in our body on our overall health and well-being and on our planet. This is something that I've seen has helped it's helped to save lives. Diabetes is the #1 health issue that people in my home state of Hawaii face. You may know, is it the same here? Is diabetes
I don't know if it's diabetes, but it is a big concern. We have a big problem with obesity as far as the public health concern in Iowa.
Right. So similarly connected to what kinds of choices that we're making in our lives. Some friends of mine in Hawaii, they're seeing what could we do to help educate and inform people, which the Blue Zones Project is really all about, making sure that we know, and so we can make informed choices. And they were helping someone who was about 35 years old, who's already having heart conditions, and who was morbidly obese. And they own a small cafe. Said, we're gonna give you 2 healthy meals every day for 3 months. And under the supervision of a doctor, they started to see how this was really directly impacting him. And he said, oh wow, this is really good food, it's delicious. And they said, try to eat salad once a day. Try to eat salad once a day. And he said, oh, easy. I already do that. And they said, oh, really? That's great. He's like, yeah, I eat macaroni salad every day. See, you're laughing. You even know better. But he wasn't joking. That's the thing. He wasn't joking. The family he grew up in, the culture he grew up in, that was just the norm. Every day you get a scoop of macaroni salad with your meal, with your fried meal that consists of Spam and rice. But for him, that was a big moment where he was able to learn, like, wow, salad actually consists of things that are like grown from the earth. They're fresh and actually really good for you. So I'm glad you asked that question, because I think we need more programs like that can better help our people. Do you agree, Grace? Do you agree? You're in between? I want to know what you think.
Well, our school is pretty healthy meals, but from where the Blue Zone Project was going, it kind of was, I've heard those kind of thinking to abolish salt altogether, but you need salt in your diet to help digest water. So, but the Blue Zone Project was kind of taking it a little too far in schools, but I think it's a good thing in theory, just if you don't take it too far.
You're amazing. Give Grace a round of applause. Come on. See, I have hope for our future. Perfect. Yes, it's a good thing. Let's do it right and not go too far and too extreme. We need salt in our diet. Yes, sir, in the back. Yep. Huh? Okay.
So why isn't foreign...
You're going to have to top Grace now. I'm sorry, but...
I don't think I can do that. Why isn't foreign policy as big of a topic of discussion and debates right now?
Why is it not?
Yeah.
That's a great question. I asked myself the same thing last night in particular. Look, I think the media has a big part to play in this. You've got these different media networks, they're hosting these debates. I don't know about you, but it's hard for voters to really walk away. Let me ask you, do you feel like, how many of you watched last night, first of all? All right, about half, maybe half of you.
We're not going to watch it if you're
Well, I'm glad to be here with you. Thank you. But do you feel, for those of you who watched, do you feel like you walked away better educated about the depth and understanding on different issues, the nuanced policy differences? Like Grace pointed out, these things matter. You have to make these distinctions. You keep 30 seconds or 60 seconds. And unfortunately, when you look at the highlight reels that come out of this, they aren't pointing out serious policy differences. They're pointing out, the gotcha lines or the attack lines or the things that drive ratings higher. And I think there was only, a couple, maybe 3 questions related to foreign policy, and I don't think there were any questions asked relating to veterans, all of which does a disservice to the most important responsibility that the president has, which is to serve as commander-in-chief. I don't have an explanation for it, other than the fact that there is a basic lack of understanding and appreciation for the cost of war, for who pays the price, the human lives, literally, our brothers and sisters in uniform. Our brothers and sisters in uniform, whose lives are sacrificed in service to our country, but whose sacrifice is dishonored by leaders who are sending them on missions unworthy of that great sacrifice. People who don't understand the cost of war, people who don't care enough to recognize how foreign policy is central to everything else that we're talking about. People who are bought into the foreign policy establishment, the military-industrial complex, that are all part of the problem that carries so much influence across both Democrat and Republican administrations, which is why we're in the position that we're in. This morning, as I was working out, you're going to laugh at this, but I was listening to a podcast that had Eisenhower's farewell statement. These are the kinds of things I listen to while I'm doing push-ups in the morning. And this podcast was saying how usually the farewell statement given by an outgoing president, I don't know, do you remember anyone that left an impression on you? Not really. Most people can't. This was a remarkable one, because for a retired general officer leaving his time in the presidency to choose that moment and that platform to tell all of us as Americans to be warned against the power of the military-industrial complex, I think says a lot, both about what he saw back then to be so dangerous and all that has happened since to our country and to our people and to our taxpayer dollars. And I did an interview with Joe Rogan a few months ago. And if those of you who listened to it, we talked about the military-industrial complex. And he's like, you know what, it's like those tinfoil hat people, those crazies who bring up the military-industrial complex. Like, President Dwight D. Eisenhower warned our nation of the military-industrial complex. And what I've read is that in his first draft of the speech, he called it the Congressional Military-Industrial Complex, drawing that link together between Congress and the big-moneyed interests who benefit off of our country waging these perpetual unnecessary wars, our country waging these unwinnable nuclear arms races. This is why I'm in this race. This is why when people say, Tulsi, why don't you just drop out? No. There is so much at stake here. And you have a whole establishment of folks who are refusing to recognize that most important responsibility the president has. I'm grateful for the experience that I've had, both serving as a soldier as well as a member of Congress for nearly 7 years, focused on our national security, focused on this connection, the impact, the costs and consequences that make me prepared to walk in on day one to do that job as President and Commander-in-Chief from the Oval Office. Thank you. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, this is all we have time for. I just want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank you for your support. Thank you for your consideration. If you're still undecided, I encourage you to share your experience here tonight, share your thoughts with your friends, and encourage others to come and to check me out. Tulsi2020.com, also very active on social media. We have our campaign folks here. If you are here and you want to help, we need your help. We need volunteers. And we're going to be tailgating at the football game tomorrow. Who's going? A few of you. Thank you so much.
I'm so glad to see you again.
Me too. Thank you so much for coming tonight.
You're so level-headed.
Can I go for a few minutes? And we're gonna, if you could please just be seated.
Yeah, of course.
How are you? We're gonna remove these 2 rows of chairs just to make room for a walkway. So if you're seated in these 2 rows, somebody's gonna ask you to move for a few minutes. You could just come up here. That'd be great.